Welcome to the Pooch Parenting Podcast, a podcast for parents with dogs. I'm Michelle Stern, a certified professional dog trainer, mom, and former teacher. Living with kids and dogs at the same time can feel like a circus. I know because I lived it too. Join us as we interview a variety of experts and parents to discuss topics that will make parenting with dogs easier, safer, and less chaotic. Also, you can love living with your dog again. I'll always keep it real, which might even mean that you hear the messiness of life in the background on occasion, but at least you know you're not alone. In this week's episode, I talk with Eran Katz, a psychologist who runs the website Apparently Parent out of Israel. We talk a lot about mindfulness, how to be present, how to apologize to our children, and overall how to set a good example. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Eran. Thank you for agreeing to talk with me today for the Pooch Parenting Podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really excited to talk with you because I learned about your work when you and I both did Tribe together with Stu McLaren. We were learning about how to support people using online services, and you and I both serve families. And what I loved about the work that you are doing is that you are approaching things from both an academic, professional background, but also as a dad, right? And so I'm a mom too. So you and I are both coming at how to support families from the fact that we are raising families of our own. And I thought that you would be a perfect person to offer some perspective.
So, as you've said, I am a psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm a dad. I have two kids. They're 7.5 and 3.5 years old. And I like to say that they are my best parenting teachers. I've been interested in parenting, I think, a little bit even before I became a dad. Something that intrigued me in my work, in my academic studies. And as I went more and more into my own parenting, I started to learn more about what it really means to be a parent. And, you know, I can laugh about how I used to look at other parents before I became a dad and and tell myself, I'm not going to do that. And well, today I am. So it's really different when you're in the trenches, right?
Yeah, I think so too. I think you can be so judgy before you have your own children. It's so easy to think you'll do better. Yeah. It doesn't happen.
Like it was kind of an issue when I started, when I got my master's in clinical psychology, and here in Israel where I live, we have to, after the master's, you have to do 4 years of kind of an internship where you actually practice with a lot of supervision. And I wasn't a dad yet, but I had worked with children, so I had also to kind of coach or mentor or help the parents themselves. And it was kind of always an issue because I was this young man telling these at least 40 plus years old people who already have children. I'm telling them how to act with their children, and how little did I know. But I do believe that I did know some stuff, not from my own experience, but from knowledge. And today, as I'm raising my own children, I think I can do kind of the mixture of both the knowledge about psychology and the attachment system, which interests me, and what children need, also combine that with, the day-to-day experience of being a parent.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that you said that, because I think that one of the biggest perks that I have gained from being a parent in the line of work that I do is that I'm just so much more compassionate and understanding of everyone's circumstances, because we have no idea what it's like to walk in every person's shoes, but we know what it's like to walk in ours. And if they're going through even a minute amount of similar experiences that we are, then we can just hold space for them to just say, oh my gosh, do you need a hug? Do you need to vent? Are you wondering if you made a mistake? Maybe you shouldn't have gotten that puppy while you have a toddler, or maybe you shouldn't have had that extra child, but here you are, and let me help you get through it as best as you can, because we have to deal with the situation in front of us instead of wishing things were different. You and I were talking about this before we started recording, that kids are watching everything we do all the time. And so we are modeling behavior for them, whether we realize it or not. So how does that impact our behavior as parents when we're not at our best selves? Because that can happen often, right? We have pressure, we have pandemic, we have job stress, we have bills, all of the things that we all are enduring, maybe health issues. How do we model good behavior when we ourselves can be struggling?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I think to answer that, you really have to understand that the most important thing is to accept whatever is coming up for you. In being this, learning how to be in a place of acceptance. It doesn't have to be what some people sometimes may call radical acceptance, like you have to accept everything, because that's really hard to do. But when you want to kind of model a good behavior all the time, you have to accept that sometimes you just can't, quote unquote, behave, in a good manner. Not your kid, and also not yourself as a parent, because you're stressed. You even without a pandemic, happening in the world, but even more so, we stress for time. We have to juggle between doing our jobs and taking care of the children, and especially when you have young children, like toddlers or young school children, when you still need to keep an eye on everything just to make sure nobody's killing everybody else. It's just hard. You stretch too thin, and there's only so much you can do, even if there are two parents in the house. And you have to allow yourself to be in a place where you sometimes mess up, I mean emotionally. So I sometimes get parents talking to me about um, how they lost it with the children, and they just couldn't have it anymore, and they screamed and yelled, or sometimes cried in front of the children, and they're feeling really bad about it. And what I want to say is that it's okay. You don't have to feel bad about it. It's actually a very kind of good way to model that life has negative aspects to it, and negative emotions. Because one of the things that really bugs me when I see parents and children is when parents are trying to dismiss the bad emotions that children have. So when a child doesn't get something that he or she wants, and they get angry, and the parent tells them, don't be angry. You don't have the right to be angry about that. And we do that. I catch myself saying similar things sometimes as well, because it's kind of maybe how we were brought up, etc. So that's one thing that we can say. Or sometimes a child can be sad and cry. So don't cry. There's nothing to be sad about. It's nothing. Or when, especially for the boys, parents can say something like, don't whine like a little girl, or stuff like that. And and so putting the gender issues aside for a second, whenever we do that as parents, we kind of sending the message that negative emotions are bad, and we don't want to have negative emotions. And then lo and behold, 20 or 30 years later, they come to my office as adults, not knowing how to cope with negative emotions in their relationships, for example, in their adult relationships, friendships and romantic relationships. So I think we as parents have to model that sometimes we have bad emotions and we can manage them, because the thing that separates us adults from children usually is that we have the brain capacity to not control but regulate our emotions. So we can, if we know how, if we learned from our parents or from other people, from psychologists, wherever, we learn how to manage our emotions. So if we can teach that to our children, that's one of the best gifts we can give them.
I love that, because I am always drawing parallels between people and dogs, but that's the nature of my work as a behavior consultant, because behavior is behavior, and it's the intrinsic feelings that a creature has. of self. The feelings that come up with that are, applicable to, I think, all species. So I do think it's interesting that you're talking about regulation, because I know that a lot of dogs, puppies, for example, can't regulate themselves at all. And so we have to set them up to be successful, right? Because they can't be successful on their own. And I think that draws some parallels to our role as a parent with children, that we have to set our kids up to be successful. So,
Exactly.
if they can't regulate themselves, if they're really angry, if they're breaking things because they're super upset and they just need to vent and get things out, then we can manage the situation. We can help them not make mistakes, just like we can help a puppy not make mistakes. We can use a pen, for example, or we could put a leash on to say, you know what, I'm going to help you. I'm going to literally give you tools so that you don't act inappropriately, right? And I think that if we talk about these things, I look at a lot of things through the lens of my life as a teacher before, because I taught for a long time. And I think that everything can be a teachable moment. And so if we then are experiencing a hard time and then we talk about it with our kids, I think that we're also giving them tools to hopefully prevent them from needing to see a therapist because they can't control their emotions in 20 or 30 years. Does that make sense? Can you see parallels there?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And when you were talking about how we dog owners, we help our dogs maybe regulate themselves, or we act on their behalf when they're all over the place, we are actually making sure that they are safe, right? And I think sometimes parents don't know how to do that for their children. They don't expect their children, or maybe I should have said that they expect a measure of adultness from their children that we don't expect from our dogs. And it's a funny parallel to make, but I don't know if it's true. But I remember that when we used to have me and my wife, we used to have a dog a couple of years back, and we read somewhere that dogs are, or at least dogs like her, she was a poodle, they have like this, they think like 2 years old children, something like that. I don't know if it's true or not, but you can see the parallel. So your children will grow up from the 2 years old phase, but when your dog is, I don't know what is the equivalent of temper tantrums in dogs, but they're
It's
all
still
over the
a temper
place.
tantrum.
Yeah.
They do.
So what do? You maybe you put them in a pen, you put them on a leash, you make sure they don't hurt themselves or anybody else, and you know that it will pass. And you do the same with children. You don't expect your dog to just to relax just because you screamed at him to relax, right? You don't go to your dog and if your dog seems angry because, I don't know, you didn't give him or her a treat, would you scold your dog and tell him you don't have anything to be angry about? No, you're gonna make a funny cute face and tell him who's angry now, right? Something like that. We don't do that to our children. We expect something else from them. And dogs and children are not the same, and we should expect something else from children if we want them to grow up. But we are the scaffolding of their emotional life. We have to help them. We bring them the bridges that help them grow up.
I love that. I'm writing that down. We are the scaffolding of their emotional life. I'm going to make a graphic of that. I think you're right. I think it's important that we do that both for our dogs and kids. I was imagining a really tired parent dealing with a tantrum from their dog versus like in a split screen, right? So one side is them dealing with the dog in a tantrum and the other is dealing with the kid in a tantrum. And I was thinking about what you said earlier about how we often say things that are really mean and inappropriate. Why don't you act like a big girl? Things like that. Like, why, you're getting so big. Why are you still acting like a baby? And, people can say things that are hurtful and not helpful, But you don't say those things to your dog. I mean, I'm sure people say really inappropriate things to their dog too, but
I
since
mean,
the dog
yeah.
doesn't understand it, we're not causing damage unless our kids are watching us do it. But
Mhm.
instead, we're just like, oh, don't be ridiculous. I'm sorry you're having such a hard time. And, let's take some time and we both cool off, right? At least if we're behaving appropriately, that's what we do. We don't use fear or pain or intimidation or things of that nature, right? Because you and I are on the same page about using strategies that are, obviously positive, that promote nice, emotional well-being of our kids
Mhm.
and, in my
Yeah,
opinion, of our dogs too, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
This is why this is what our main job as parents is to provide a safe environment where positive experiences can occur and can grow.
right. Right. I think that's really good. Do you have any tips for parents to sort of shift their mindfulness a little bit if they're struggling and they know what they should be doing, or they think they know what they should be doing? They want to do better than they're currently doing. Do you have any advice or any strategies that they can try to implement to, I don't know, to become present and a little bit more grounded so that they can then model the appropriate behavior? Is it as simple as just taking a minute to cool off?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in a way it is simple as taking a minute to cool off, but it's very complicated to take a minute because sometimes it's like you don't have the bandwidth. You don't have that minute within you. And
Hmm.
that's something that I tell parents a lot. Take the time because you do have the time. You can step back in the middle of a fight because none of us, when we parent, we usually don't have to be in this emergency mode that we are in. So yeah, sometimes we're rushing because we're late to work or school or something, or sometimes you do have to be on alert because I don't know, your child just climbed on a closet or something, and you have to make sure it doesn't fall down. But usually, when we're having an argument or a bad time with our children, it's not like we are in the middle of a major surgery, right? So we
Yeah.
have to we can't leave the room for a second. We can physically or emotionally, mentally, we can. So I think the first thing and the most important thing is to really be aware of what's going on for you. And that takes a little bit of practice. This is why I think exercises that put the attention back inside inside your body and inside your own consciousness are really important. You have to make time for yourself,
Yeah.
even in a pandemic, even with everything, even if you have 5 children. You have to find a couple of minutes a day to meditate. You don't
Yeah.
have to, but I recommend that,
Okay.
or something of the sort, because
Right.
I believe, and I know the science says, and I felt it on myself. When you practice something like some kind of meditation, or you journal every day about the things that happen to you, and you open up this way of looking at yourself and at your experiences with your children in an open, non-judgmental way, you are helping yourself, your future self that is going to find themselves in the moment angry or sad or whatever, stressed. You will be more able to step back and take that minute to cool off, or count to 10 before you scream or whatever. And even if you weren't able to do that, even if you did scream and you are regretting it as the words are leaving your mouth, when you are able to take the step back after the fact and cool yourself down for a little, and then you can say something like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Okay, but I was very angry that you did this and that. Okay, that's a very different experience both for you and your child. And that's what being the responsible adult means. So coming back to your question, I think that it's not like we have a little, I don't have one magic tip that can really help everybody here, but I think you need to find ways to be more present with yourself, by different meditative exercises, both formal like sitting on on a chair and focusing on your breath, or informal practices that you can use. There are different types of things that you can do, and getting present with yourself however you can. And when you do that, you are more able to do that in the moment when it happens.
I think that parents need tips on what is productive and what we should be doing as opposed to what we shouldn't be doing. And I think the same is true when we are helping our dogs. It does nobody any good to walk around saying, cut it out, stop it, knock it off, because we're not giving them any constructive support on what we wish they would do instead. And sometimes it's as simple as saying, do this. I've heard there's an app called Headspace, and I've tried it a long time ago, and then I kind of forgot about it, but I know that it's a really popular app, and I know there are other resources that we can link to in the show notes for giving parents some simple tools to just breathe, be present, and feel your body, and just calm down, regulate your breathing and things like that, so that we can then approach our children in a way that we would want to model for them. And I know what you mean when you say regretting the words as they're coming out of your mouth, because that gave me this visceral memory of parenting in some of my not so successful days, right? I mean, one of my two kids was adopted from Guatemala, and we had a lot of very, very significant challenges with him. He had a lot of trouble regulating himself, and at times things were more challenging than I ever thought possible. And I am not proud of how I acted in a lot of those times. And I said things that I am so embarrassed to admit. But then eventually, developmentally, when we were ready to address those in a way that we could both process that information and those apologies, we could really try to move forward and step out of that. And instead of holding negative energy about what we did, we can move forward and try to have a better relationship moving forward. Yeah, it's, I feel so good. I feel like I'm on some other end of a bridge, that I made it, to a certain point. And now
it's a journey that you both took.
And it can be brutal, and it can feel like it's tearing apart your self-esteem, tearing apart your relationships. I didn't know if our marriage would last, and it has, which feels miraculous in retrospect. I have no idea how we managed to pull through that together, because it was brutal. Where can people find you and find out more about the work that you're doing if they need some support? Because I know that you and I do a lot of different kinds of work, and we can serve people anywhere.
Yeah. So first and foremost, my website is called Apparently Parent. So just by going to apparentlyparent.com, they can learn more about me and my podcast, which is the Apparently Parent Podcast, where I talk sometimes by myself, sometimes I bring people to the show as well to talk about everything regarding navigating the waters of parenting. That's how I like to think about it.
Yep.
And there's one workshop that I created a couple of 2 months ago that is available online, and it really is about finding creating what I call the parenting map. So I'm talking about the 3 pillars of being more confident as a parent. And one of the major things there is what we just talked about, how to regulate how to take care of yourself in order to be better able to be there for your child when they need you, not really angry or really stressed, but they need you in a different kind of way. So part of that workshop is really me giving some resources about how to practice meditations, even if you have just 5 minutes a day or during your work day and stuff like that, and also other things about finding your own North Star as a parent and other issues that I'm talking about. So that's also available if you go to apparentlyparent.com/workshop. If you treat yourself better and with more respect and tender, loving care for your own self, you'll be much more able to do so for your children or your dogs or whatever. And everybody wins.
Thank you, Erin. I'm so grateful that you took the time to talk with us today. I'm
Thank you.
excited to keep sharing that ripple effect to everybody who listens to this. So thank you again.
My pleasure.
If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Pooch Parenting Podcast on iTunes or on the podcast app of your choice. If you're looking for ongoing support for your family with dogs, be sure to get on the waiting list for my Thriving Parents with Kids and Dogs membership at www.safekidsanddogs.com. And don't forget to follow Pooch Parenting on Instagram or Facebook. Thanks for listening.